entered the 34th day with military attacks by the US and the Zionist entity and Iran still ongoing, expanding across the region. Tonight, Iran is firing beyond Israel, warning Gulf states they could be next, while the United States, led by Donald Trump, claims its war objectives are nearing completion, even as it threatens new strikes, including on Iran's energy infrastructure. On the ground, the escalation is already taken a deadly toll. A strike on a key bridge linking Tehran to Kharg has left at least 8 people dead and dozens wounded. An attack Iran is calling proof of what its foreign minister Abbas Araghchi describes as a moral collapse, insisting that targeting civilian infrastructure will not force Tehran to surrender. At the same time, Iran is raising the stakes dramatically at sea. The Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows, is now at the center of a global standoff, with Tehran threatening long-term restrictions, proposing a new system to control maritime passage, and warning of more destructive retaliation to come. The response is global. The United Kingdom has brought together more than 40 countries to pressure Iran to reopen the strait, while Europe warns it will not accept any system where ships must pay or seek permission to pass. Meanwhile, oil prices are surging, markets are shaken, and fears of a wider regional war are growing, with Russia and China stepping in diplomatically and the world watching closely as this confrontation risks spiraling beyond control. To discuss this and more, we're joined with a panel of guests in just a moment. Without further ado, let's bring in our guests to talk about the situation in the Middle East and beyond. And first, I welcome Mr. Abdel Toumi, geopolitical analyst specialized in the MENA region. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by Hussam Barkan, a journalist at Al24 News.
Thanks for having me, Mariam.
Always a pleasure, Hussam. We're also joined by Mr. Sasha Shabra, Taipei-based security analyst and publisher of Formosa Review on Substack, and he's joining us live via Teams from Portsmouth.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Chris Mohammed Sessi, geopolitical observer and financial expert via Teams from New York. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invite, and my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps, gentlemen, let's start with escalation and the signal sent today, and perhaps with you, Mr. Abdel Toumi. So Iran is not only firing in Israel, it's also firing in Gulf countries. We have seen that they targeted and damaged yesterday an Amazon Web Services data center facility in Bahrain, while Trump is threatening to attack for 2 or more weeks. How do you interpret the contradiction between battlefield reality and political messaging? So Donald Trump is saying he will exit, but is also saying that he will keep striking for 2 to 3 weeks.
As the war continues and has already entered its second month, and so that it goes, the escalation. Meanwhile, everyone was hoping for de-escalation. But following the ongoing this escalation, particularly the last 48 hours, there is actually even the rule of engagement in this war has totally changed. And as a result of the President Donald Trump himself, who is in total confusion. And you mentioned a key word here is contradiction. And now he is cultivating sort of an art of contradiction. Having said that, is because now what was his speech last night when he mentioned that he was convinced that the war would be ended in 3 days. Now we are already in the 33 days, and there is
34 today.
There is no end game ahead. But it's a part of President Trump confusion and no strategy from day one. And the message of last night that he was addressed to, actually he was framed for a domestic or for his base, for his voters. And even though the Americans, large Americans, are against this unjust war and illegal war. So now, as far as the Iranians' reiteration on the American bases and assets in the region, going after these Gulf countries, totally, it's the dynamic of this war has changed, and there is here an element in this war is about the third party in this war is the Zionist entity prime minister and his messianic government, who are pushing to drag the region, the entire region, into chaos, and therefore trying to drag the Gulf countries to enter this war. Meanwhile, the Iranians are having this horizontal strategy and are continuing to absorb the heavy weight and bombing that have been going on for the last month. So now this is again, that's part of this change, game change in this war, because now the objective, one of these confusing objective was to go in after the nuclear program and then change to the regime change, the fall of the regime. Now they're attacking civilian facilities, to the latest, actually, the attack on scientists and
universities,
technology and civilians. Actually, when they attack the Pasteur Institute and the blown up bridge, it's a part of war crimes. And this is why wonders about President Donald Trump, if he does have lawyers and legal advisors in the White House and in the Pentagon to mention these sensitive issues.
Mr. Sasha Shabra, perhaps the United States says war objectives are nearing completion, yet it is openly threatening further strikes, including on Iran's energy infrastructure. So is this a sign of strategic success or escalation without a clear endgame?
Look, war, according to Clausewitz, is politics as an extension of politics by other means. What that means is that for your war to be successful, you need to have political goals that you want to achieve. And I think it's very clear, based on the continuing contrasting statements we see from the United States, that there are no goals. So despite the immense military capabilities that the United States has, the immense air power, missile power, naval power, all of this immense military domination, there's really no end to this war because there are no political goals. So you can blow things up, you can create a lot of chaos, and you can, in desperation, turn towards civilian targets. But given that there are no objectives to this war, or at least no clearly articulated ones, I think we will see no end to it. And we'll see any number of changing objectives or changing definitions of the strategy simply because there is no political objectives, which makes this an unwinnable war from the United States perspective.
Hussam, there is no end game. Iran is warning of more destructive retaliation. It retaliated today, and its foreign minister has insisted earlier that strikes on civilian infrastructure is not going to force their surrender.
Exactly. So, Mariam, when we talk about deterrence in international relations, or in theory, when we talk about deterrence, it works on both sides. It means that both sides believe that the cost is going to be very heavy for both sides, and deterrence was designed to draw some red lines that nobody can cross. But what we're witnessing right now is that deterrence is not working. We're seeing that both of them are escalating. Both of them are sending a message that they are not surrendering. Both of them are saying that we are ready to handle the cost. And this is why things are, especially for all the analysts currently, they're talking about the fact that we don't know exactly what is it heading, because both of them are escalating. When we talk about Iran now, they're saying that whether you hit bridges or very important infrastructure, this is not gonna stop Iran from continuing the war, and it's not gonna push Iran to surrender. At the same time, Iran is now, they're saying that they are no longer in the defense, but they're in the attack. And they are promising for even heavier retaliation, even more stronger retaliation. So we're seeing both of them are ready to handle the cost of the war. And this is why most of analysts and us journalists following the war, we're seeing that this is very, very dangerous, because both of them are saying that pain will not produce compliance. And this is why we don't really know where things are going. And this is why there was the speech of Donald Trump, because it was super important. It was basically a message to all the people concerned of this war. And because basically what Donald Trump did is that he sent a message to three parties. The first one are the American people. He sent a message to the American people to more of explain the policy, like what they're doing, even though it was not really clear, because there was no end game, there was no exit strategy. And you wanted to continue?
Perhaps we
Because
will have a
reach
comment.
that.
We will
Okay.
reach that later on. We will talk
Perfect.
about Trump's address to the
Perfect.
nation,
Yeah.
and we just want to see if Mr. Chris Mohammed Sassi is here still with us or not. About Trump's address to the nation, and we just want to see if Mr. Sassi, can you hear us? Sassi is here still with us or not. Address to the nation, and we just want. It looks like.
Yes, I can hear
Please, could you reduce the sound, the volume of your television? We can hear the echoes. It looks like.
Hello?
Please, could you reduce? Mr.
I
Sassi?
can hear you, but you cannot hear me. Apparently.
We can now
Hello?
hear you. Perhaps there's a technical problem. Maybe. Now talking about the Strait of Hormuz, it is a central point and issue in this conflict. Mr. Sasha Shabra, Iran is now threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz long term to the US and Israel and the allies. How realistic is this threat militarily, and what would it mean globally? And actually, how can they sustain the closure of the Strait of Hormuz more than that?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's not a threat. It's a reality. The strait is closed, or at least it is closed to, those ships that Iran does not want to pass. So this is a reality, and we've seen it there. I would maybe disagree with what one of the previous guests has just said, that deterrence has failed. In a sense, deterrence has failed, and that there is armed conflict. But look at where the U.S. Navy is. It's nowhere near the coast of Iran. The Iranians have done an excellent job of deterring the Americans from entering a ground war, from any amphibious attacks, and from approaching the Iranian coast. So in terms of how long can they sustain this, I think they can sustain this indefinitely. Maybe their ability to deter American ships from approaching may decrease as their abilities are degraded. But good luck getting any civilian ships through there. Good luck getting any insurance companies to insure any tankers to go through there. It doesn't require much military force at all to close the strait. How many mines does it take to create a minefield? Only one. It only takes one mine to create a minefield. And no insurer is going to insure a ship to go through any kind of minefield. And then you have to clear that minefield. And who's going to do that? Trump has made it clear he doesn't really want the U.S. Navy to be involved in clearing that. He wants other navies to come in, and there's no other navies with those capabilities. So I think we can say the strait is closed, and it will remain closed until the Iranians decide to open it.
Maybe speaking about the UK, it is gathering over 40 countries to pressure Iran, and the EU is considering scaling up its naval mission. Are we witnessing the formation of a maritime coalition against Iran, Mr. Sasha?
No, I mean, there's simply no coalition. The United States Navy is the most powerful Navy in the world by a long shot. What are these other navies going to add? Are the British going to bring anything in? I mean, their naval capabilities are quite, pathetic, to be honest. There's very little they can bring to bear. So you have the most powerful Navy in the world that's unable to keep the strait open. So, this idea of a coalition, I think this is really just, a political talking point that Mr. Trump is using against the Europeans, and perhaps to try to deflect blame from his own inability to keep the strait open. At the end of the day, as I mentioned before, there's no military solution here. You have an asymmetric adversary that can have its navy completely destroyed, its air force completely destroyed, but it's going to maintain the ability to keep that strait closed as long as they have a few drones, a few missiles, a few mines, a few fast boats. So there's really no solution other than the two sides coming to the table and coming to some sort of agreement. And at this point, I don't see why the Iranians would, want to come to the table, given that, the Americans and the Israelis keep trying to assassinate all the negotiators. So I just don't see any end in the near or medium term to the current conflict and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
No near end to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, Mr. Toomey?
Actually, it's again, I mentioned earlier about the game changer in this war, and this is a part, about the Strait of Hormuz crisis, in which has become a global energy crisis. So now Iran it still have actually its wild card in this war, and is managing this card smartly, and actually to the point where it is making pressure on the U.S. And also on the neighboring countries, notably the Gulf countries. But as far as the Europeans' attitude or comportment in this, and having this 35 countries meeting and to push for or possibility to break through of this global energy crisis. And again, the Europeans are very weak, and they don't weigh in, and they don't have much leverage in this crisis because, and having now, it has become clear now there is this disagreement with, or to some extent, it's almost a divorce with the US President, Mr. Donald Trump. And President Donald Trump has been challenging the Europeans, whether on the Ukrainian dossier, to the Greenland crisis, and now to this unjust war. But because we are not in the context, I understand, the French and the Brits, they have this attitude and they want to challenge the Americans because, again, they are suffering a great deal, so that the Americans, of this energy crisis, and that is impacting at home. And we saw today how it was a huge shortage on fuel in France, for instance, and it was a long line in department like Île-de-France. It's the largest department in France. It was like a panic. And so for the Europeans now, particularly the French and the Brits, we are not in the context of the 80s when they did manage to secure the crisis at that time. And because of the dynamic of the power balance and leaders, political leaders, such as Europe now doesn't have leaders like they did in the 80s, for instance, with Mitterrand and Thatcher and so on. So this is why we are in this context. It's totally a new context. And Iran of 2026 is not Iran of 1984, 86. So this is why it is, and again, we are speaking about the no goals of this war. There is a major goal here. It's about the reshape, the redesign of the geopolitics and the landscape of the region, and so that geoeconomics.
Back to you, Mr. Sassi. I think the technical problem was fixed. Can you hear us?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. I address you the same question. We were talking about the fact that the UK is now gathering with over 40 other countries to pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and the EU is considering scaling up its naval mission. Does this mean there is a formation of a new maritime coalition against Iran?
Well, I should say to answer a question, is not quite a full maritime coalition against Iran yet, but it is moving in that direction. What's actually happening is the UK, as you said, brought together 40 countries to respond to Iran blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. It's a critical global route. As the predecessor said, is 90% of the passage from the oil going overseas, the world trade. The immediate focus is coordinated, diplomatic, and with an economic pressure, not only with the military action. But this is a broad agreement that the strait must be reopened and the shipping protected. That said, this is a large, coordinated, apparently, international response, but still mostly, I repeat, political, not military. Where the maritime coalition idea comes in, there are early signs of potential naval security coalition, but it is not fully formed yet. Regarding the last information that I can come through, the countries are discussing future, I said again, future military coordination, like escorting the ships, clearing the sea mines, and the rescue operation for a standard vessel. You have more, I think at the count of today, something like 1,000 vessels over there that, like in the parking lot. But the following military planning meeting is also scheduled, which could then shape an actual maritime force. But some proposals include a naval reassurance or escort mission after de-escalation. Then, as I said, what is significant and why is it very significant? The Strait of Hormuz carry 20% of the global oil supply, but you have 90% of the passage, as I was saying. So the Iran blockade has already stranded thousands of ships, spiked the oil price, as my predecessor was saying, and threatened the food and energy supply chain. And this is why so many countries, not just the Western one, even the African and the Asian are involved. Then you have, of course, the major complication that you don't have a unified military stance. Many countries, specifically in Europe, oppose direct military confrontation because they are fearing an escalation. The US is not leading this effort and has even told allies to make the lead themselves. And you heard the last response to the UK. It was not in the line of thought of Mr. Trump. So therefore, the bottom line is there is a broad international alignment against Iran action, but is currently diplomatic more than military. It's diplomatic with kind of economical pressure, and it could evolve in the maritime naval coalition, just as I said before, escort, etc., but not for a fully military action like Mr. Trump tried to make us believe.
Maybe back to you, Mr. Abdel Nour. To me, Russia and Iran coordinated. We have seen that the foreign minister of Russia and the foreign minister of Iran have discussed earlier Middle East with the Middle East on the phone. Russia and Iran are coordinating diplomatically, while China is calling for de-escalation. So can we talk about the emergence of two opposing international forces, new coalitions?
It is exactly because now we are in that dynamic, and as I said, so the goal of this war now, it has become geopolitics and geoeconomics. And speaking about the Strait of Hormuz, and so one has to remember there is another player who is totally absent is the UN, because this part, I mean, could be played by the UN, and we have an example of the grain deal that was brokered by Turkey and the UN in 2022 in light of the grain crisis as a result of the Ukraine war. So this is now we are in this dynamic of the superpowers, the two major superpowers, actually the opposite to the US, I mean China and Russia. And this is actually, they are the two superpowers who are today watching carefully and attentively the development of this war and where this war is heading and the outcome of this war. I mean, there is a perfect quote from Napoleon when he said, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. And we are in this dynamic now. So this is it again. Right now, we are in this escalation process, and Iran is playing hardball with the US and the Zionist entity prime minister because it is his war now. So, but there is a possibility now for negotiation. And actually, interestingly enough, the US War Secretary, actually 2 or 3 days ago, he mentioned in one of his press conference, actually, we will be negotiating, or we are going to negotiate, but under fire, so that with bombs. So, okay, so today the Iranians are, of course, looking for that gate, and the Chinese are positioning themselves in this trajectory of diplomatic breakthrough. And in light of the mediation of the quartet of Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and I forget Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Egypt. So these four countries, I mean, powerful and the pivotal states in the region are trying to actually playing the message, the distributing messages, or taking message from here and there, and playing an intermediary role. But China is positioning itself to be a serious guarantor, because the Iranians are not looking for just a breakthrough for discussions. They are looking for serious negotiations that will lead for a ceasefire and an agreement on ceasefire that will end this war, unlike what the Israelis are looking for, because the Zionist entity prime minister, he doesn't want to end this war. It's his doctrine, endless wars. And he wants to have like kind of Gaza doctrine or Hezbollah doctrine, or strike a deal or an agreement and then just destroy it and go on. But the Iranians now are going towards that direction, but they are looking for serious guarantor, so that China and Russia will be playing that guarantors for the process, for future negotiations.
Back to you, Mr. Sasha. European officials, they're saying that Iran cannot be allowed to fully control the Strait of Hormuz. Is this setting the stage for a direct confrontation between Iran and the Western naval forces?
Well, I guess as they say, you and what army? So the Europeans may say this, but they don't have any way of changing the facts on the ground, which is that Iran does control the Strait of Hormuz. And as I said, this is an asymmetric situation, and they maintain that control. They have a huge littoral, a huge coastline overlooking this. It's a huge hinterland with mountains, and they have their underground missile cities. They can fire drones off the back of a pickup truck anywhere. So unless anyone has a way of removing those threats, there's simply no way to open the Strait of Hormuz, and least of all the Europeans, who are not involved in this war in any way. And no one is incentivizing Iran to back down. As it stands, the price of oil is increasing. Iran's oil exports are increasing, and they increasingly also understand that this is a fight to the end. The Americans and the Israelis are trying to end the regime, and if they don't stand up now, if they don't play all their cards, which includes controlling the Strait of Hormuz, then they may end up, in as has been alluded to, a Lebanon, a Gaza type situation. I think clearly the Israelis would like to see something like that, or turn Iran into Syria, and this is going to be their stand. So unless anyone has a way of changing the facts on the ground, which no one is committed to doing so with ground troops, then nothing will change, and we're going to remain stuck in this situation.
Hussam, maybe the EU is saying that Iran cannot control the Strait of Hormuz. Do they want to go in direct confrontation with Iran and reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Is that what they're seeking?
So, Mariam, it's very unlikely that the Europeans are going to be involved in this because we've been following, as a journalist, been following all the statements from the officials, whether from the United States or from the European nations, and most of them were complaining at the very beginning of the war, saying that the United States did not consult the Europeans, and even before the war, there was a lot of fissures or a lot of division between the United States and Europe. We're talking about the Davos conference. We're talking about the Munich Security Conference. If you've just followed their speeches, we noticed that there is a lot of division between the United States. Even like how the United States was dealing, the new administration, the Trump administration, how it was dealing with Europeans with a lot of arrogance and with a lot of distance. And now, after the war started, the Europeans, they use the same narrative. They're saying that you did not consult us, thus we're not going to be involved in this war. And so it's very unlikely that Europeans are going to be involved. As the previous guest was talking realistically in the field, even the United States, which is considered the superpower, like with the army, biggest army in the world, they could not open the Strait of Hormuz. How could you wait from Europeans to do so? This is not the only thing, but what is important to highlight is what kind of army the United States has, because the army that the United States has currently was built during the Cold War, and it's not designed for this kind of wars of today. Now the wars of today are completely different. It's very asymmetric. We're seeing like a bit like the U.S. carrier they invested billions of dollars withdrawing from a drone of $20,000, which is crazy. This is why, like, the kind of army that the United States, even though it's the biggest, the strongest, but it's not designed for today's kind of wars. We're seeing, like, back then it was some kind of a projection of power against, the Soviet Union, the biggest carriers, the biggest warships, the biggest rockets. But it doesn't work like this today, and we've seen this. Like, these very cheap drones are really causing a lot of problems to the United States. So it's very unlikely that this is going to happen. And also, like, as I said, like, the world is different now. They've been betting on all the sanctions on Iran. They've been betting on how weak Iran was. But now we're seeing, like, powers like Israel and the United States could not do anything against it because we live in a different world. And not only this, but even economies are very interconnected. So even though you're stronger, Iran currently is using an economic card that is very powerful because economies are so interconnected. So if you continue this war, you're going to not only hurt Iran, but you're going to hurt the international system. You're going to hurt everybody. A lot of countries are going to be hurt. So it's very, very important to emphasize on what kind of wars we're having right now and to understand the whole situation. So it's very, very unlikely that Europeans are going to be involved in this war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe back to Donald Trump's speech to the nation, back to you, Mr. Abdelnour. To me, he was speaking about a total destruction of Iran, and yet he denies seeking a regime change. He said that his goal is reached, and then he's saying that he's going to stay there. So is there a contradiction, or this is a deliberate strategic ambiguity? He's doing all of this in purpose.
Actually, it's a part of his strategy. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is sure there are a sense of ambiguity there in his speech, but as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the speech was sent or addressed to his base. Just to his base. Mainly. I mean, it was about 18 minutes, and he didn't mention about the main goals. And actually, he said that he destroyed totally Iran. Mm. But there is an interesting phrase in his speech when he said that Iran is totally, quote unquote, obliterated, and he will send, if Iranians don't complain, he will send them to the age of stone. Okay, mm-hmm. I will continue with that phrase. And he said also where they belong. Honestly, this is such an arrogant and such disrespectful attitude and message from Westerners toward Easterners. And this brings us to the studies of Edward Said, Franz Fanon, and so on. And having said that, Iran and all the entire region, actually including us, we are Easterners, it is, again, disrespectful. This is why when we speak about negotiations with the Iranians, and this is why the Iranians, we said, we have been saying that there is a key word in any negotiation or discussions, it's trust. Now you add respect. What the Iranians now are saying, not only you should respect us, we have to trust you, which is totally lost. I mean, you don't trust the U.S. administration. So now there is a respect. And this is why we are in this dynamic of, as I said earlier, about the goal of this war. It is about geopolitics, economics, and also it's the Zionist states prime minister war and objectives. It's about the clash of civilizations and so on. So President Donald Trump, he is, explicitly or implicitly he mentioned that. But again, this is what struck me when I heard that. And because this is not new, remember the region, the Gulf region, is in the last 40 years, it is in its fourth war. And the repercussions and the consequences are terrible for the region. So, and today, Iran is positioned itself in this posture of a serious player, and that will change the dynamic of geopolitics and geoeconomics of the region.
Of the region. Mr. Sessi, perhaps your take on Trump's statements last night, very late at night, he was saying that he's going to send Iran back to the Stone Age. Mr. Sessi, are you with us?
Yeah, I hear you. Just before I answer your question, I would like to remind my colleagues at two sample points. The first one is the Strait of Hormuz was opened before this war of choice of Mr. Trump and Netanyahu. The second point is now we are talking about negotiation, but when you have negotiation, as Dr. Toumi was saying, you have to have the truth. Mm-hmm. You have trust each other. Or hear again and again the following speech of Mr. Trump is again a stab in the back to Iran, like the 48 hours, like the 10 days, and like the 6th April. We are April 2, and they're still bombarding day and night Iran. Now, his speech, for me, I didn't learn anything from him. He's just come with this nonsense, with this BS, sorry, excuse my English, to say that he is going to annihilate, to destruct, etc. The fact is, Iran is there. Iran is still sending the drones every day, answering every day, not only to Israel, but all the base of the GCC, and he's only defending himself. And his speech for me doesn't mean anything. Okay. I didn't learn anything.
There was nothing new in the speech.
What I'm looking for is that the new broker, like Pakistan, for example, which is a Muslim country and have the deterrent nuclear power, that they are saying, no, if this continues, it's going to be a global, and they are not going to stay on the side. They are going to help Iran with the nuclear power. That's one thing. The other thing, you have China. China is a broker. China put Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023, I guess, together, and it sounds to be fine. And you have also Russia, what they're in was always there, and he's going to help, and they are helping in their own way. And this is why I'm a little bit confused when some of us will talk about the Security Council of UN. Security Council of UN, you have many resolutions regarding Gaza. None of them were respected. Europe didn't say anything. And the genocide continues at the moment I'm talking to you. So why are we even considering the Security Council? We take the Arab League. The Arab League, 2-3 days ago, or last week, sorry, what did they say? They side with the GCC. And at no point they said that the aggressor was America and Israel. No, they say the aggressor was Iran. I don't know what to say when you are asking me about this kind of, how can I say, not you, Miriam, of course, but when you are talking, we have to go back to factuality. Again and again, we are attacking Iran, we want to destruct Iran because this is the only country in that area that stand up for 7 years against America through the through Iraq. And then at the moment when I'm talking to you, they go to South Lebanon. Now they want to take 1/3 of the Lebanon to install themselves with the excuse or, self-defense. What world are you in?
Understood.
When the truth is going to come, I'm sorry, Miriam, maybe I think out of the box, but I have to say that.
The message is clear. Maybe back to Hussam on on Trump's first address to the nation. It is coming at a critical time. How do you read the timing and also the tone of the speech and all what came in the statement of Trump?
Yeah, so basically, Miriam, we've been talking about the speech of Trump, and we noticed that all the professors and the guests were talking about the timing of the speech. It came at a time where there's escalation, there's no political solution, there's no diplomatic solution, there's no end game, and things were very foggy, like all over the world. Everybody's asking, like, what is this heading? So basically, the timing is so important because Trump basically wants to send a message for three parties I was saying earlier. The first one, as the professor was talking, is for the American people, American public, because we know that the midterm elections are getting closer, they're near. And what Trump is trying to say is that, and he mentioned this on multiple occasions during the speech, that we are victorious. He's trying to literally control the narrative. Because the media now is covering everything. They're saying that the United States and Israel are failing. They're not reaching their goals. And there's no regime change. Even though, we've noticed there's multiple statements where he said, yeah, we actually changed the regime because we murdered all their leaders, which doesn't make sense. So it's just a way for Donald Trump to try to send a message to the public that they are victorious, that what's going on currently is victory, which is not. He's trying to frame it in this way victory. Because the midterm elections are near. The second party is their allies. Allies are putting a lot of pressure on Donald Trump, even though we don't see a lot of media coverage about this, but European nations are literally suffering. Yes. If you go into the numbers, they're suffering, especially in terms of energy. We know that Europe, the energy security in Europe is very unstable. They got 30% of their energy supplies from the Gulf region, and now they cannot. They are literally, of course, they cannot. We've seen a lot of Europeans coming to Algeria, trying to get more gas from Algeria, seeing Italy and Spain. So they are literally suffering. There's a lot of pressure from the European leaders on Trump. So the first party is the public, the second one is Europeans, and the third one is the financial market. Even the financial market is very unstable. And I'm not an expert in economy, but there are multiple economists who are talking about this, how the market is suffering. So this is the kind of message that Trump wants to send. And as I told you, Miriam, it's just a way for Donald Trump to try to control the narrative. And this is why they put a lot of emphasis on the speech. Even before the speech, there was a lot of media coverage that there's going to be this speech, Trump is going to answer all the questions. But at the end of the day, the most important question was the end game. Like, do you have an exit strategy? What is the end game? So he tried to say we are victorious and the war is going to end in a few weeks, which is still very ambiguous, and it doesn't answer the question, doesn't satisfy anybody.
It is still unanswered. Back to you, Mr. Sasha. Massive anti-war protests, nearly 8 million people across the U.S. Were protesting against the war on Iran. They're saying they did not want this war. How significant is this domestic pressure on Washington's war strategy?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I think part of the problem there is in your question, you've said impact on the strategy. That implies there is a strategy. As I've said, I don't think there's a strategy. I think the pressure that led to this war came from Israel and from domestic neocon influences. Trump was not looking at public opinion. Overwhelmingly, 70% of Americans are against this war. But again, 70% of Americans have been in favor of many things with regards to foreign policies, particularly to the Middle East, and it's largely been ignored. I think the big impact will come, as has been alluded to in the discussion, and energy prices on the midterms. You can lie all you want about, the war is reaching its objectives or it's necessary for national security, which I think nobody believes. But you can't hide the gas prices. Americans drive everywhere and they're used to cheap gas. And at the end of the day, there's going to be a complete wipeout for the Republicans in the midterms. And this will be quite devastating. But I think another thing you want to look at is not just the impact on the ruling party, the Republicans, but on the Democrats. You've seen the establishment Democrats have been very meek on countering this war, even though it's illegal and it was done without the consent of the Congress, which is completely unconstitutional. You have the Democratic leadership that have largely been agitating themselves for war with Iran for a long time, have been very reticent to condemn it. So I think you'll see a lot of victories in Democratic primaries by anti-war and anti-interventionist candidates. And this is going to change the nature of the Democratic Party, and it's going to change the nature of foreign policy in the U.S. In cycles to come. Unfortunately, I do think that the establishment recognizes this. I think the Israelis recognize this. I think the neocons recognize this. And I think that's why they're going all in on this moment. They know this may be the last moment where you can mobilize the United States, the military, to go all in on this kind of military adventure in the Middle East. And there'll be a lot of pressure to keep it going indefinitely and to really try to make this a very apocalyptic situation. So I think there's a lot going on there, and it's going to be quite dangerous in the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about the U.S. Foreign policy, Mr. Sesi, divisions are emerging within the political parties, within the Democratic Party of the war. Are we witnessing a deeper shift in the U.S. foreign policy consensus, like our guest Sasha was saying?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the last election, I think it was a senator, and he went to MAGA country. It was, and then it was the Democrat who was elected. And within MAGA, don't forget, Trump was elected on the promises that it's not going to be war. And he even said to his opponent, Mrs. Harris, that, if it was him, it would never happen. Well, look where we are now. So definitively, and as also Hussein was saying, and Dr. Toumi as well, the manifestation that you have in America today is not only against the war, is also why you have to do the war for Israel, that is costing billion and billion of the American taxpayer. So yes, is a fracture, is a station within the supporter of Mr. Trump. And the last, how do you call that? His last approval was about 68% negative, not approval, negative about the policy that is following right now with Iran. Yes, I think the next midterm election, he's going to lose definitively the majority that he has in the Congress, and probably also a Democratic Party is going to gain some seat in the Senate. And then is going, the time for accounting, maybe they even will try to impeach him for this illegal war that costs so much to the American citizens.
Mr. Toumi, we've heard Trump saying that he will leave the NATO alliance, and there are signs that tensions are with the NATO and doubts about U.S. commitments to its allies.
Actually, it's a part of his, I would say, provocative strategy or bulldozer strategy that, started with his second term administration. It is very interesting on the persona of President Trump himself. Actually, he's not an ideologue or I would say, fine strategist politician like the previous one. And actually, the American voters especially his base. I mean, he was actually promised, or when he was elected, that he will end all the wars, and he was tired about spending money overseas, and he will withdraw all the American troops from overseas. And actually, he was criticizing the doctrine of the neocons in Washington, D.C. And he wasn't actually, when you see his loyalists today and his close loyalists, whether in the State Department or the Pentagon, they didn't come, besides Roberts, I mean, who was linked to the neocons when he was in the Senate. But he didn't have that approach of strategic thinking coming from think tanks and have that influence of in his decision-making circle. But he was, again, with this bulldozer strategy, he was going after NATO, after his European allies. And for NATO, actually, it started in his first term, when he actually pushed or obliged the NATO members to increase their spending that from 2% to 5%. And then recently also he did the same thing. And the only country actually there, France and Spain, who were like Italy to some extent playing hardball with him. But again, this is the dissension within this military alliance that was created in post-World War II and in the Warsaw Pact, in the time of the Cold War, I call it then the hot Cold War, and today we are living in the kind of a Pacific coexistence hot moment. So this is why we are in this anarchy of international politics disorder. So President Donald Trump, I mean, he doesn't know what he's doing because he doesn't have a strategy and he's not a thinker. And his entourage, whether in the White House or in the Pentagon, besides the generals who are highly professional and and are very anxious and are nervous about his policies. This is why today he is cornered, and that this war actually it will shape his legacy. And knowing that President Donald Trump, he has such an ego and he gives too much importance to his image. And this is speaking about the midterm elections next November, even though we are still 8 months ago, and 8 months in politics, it's a lifetime, anything could happen. But this could hurt him. But again, his goal or short-term goal for this war, he mentioned it like 2-3 weeks, and he will end it. But we don't know. Nobody knows how this war will end because we are heading toward the unknown as a result of no strategy and no exit strategy. To the contrary, will lead to an exit tragedy. And the tragedy will be actually impacted the region. And again, if I may say this, one has to stop when we speak about the Middle East and the Gulf countries and stop to look at them as a market, as an oil or gas, whatever field. And again, speaking about, sure, the last 10 or 20 years, the Gulf countries did enjoy this prosperity and the business activeness and soft power. But today, they are also, themselves, they have to review their vision and, of course, and relation with the U.S. because now they are dealing with an unpredictable president.
Unpredictable president and future for the Gulf countries. Back to you, Mr. Sasha Shabra. Is the U.S. struggling to fully protect its regional allies? If so, does it risk reshaping the alliances in the Middle East? We've seen that the Gulf countries are now being attacked.
Absolutely. For so long, this has really been the arrangement the U.S. has had, that it will be the security guarantor, and a lot of these countries will perhaps make unsavory decisions such as growing ties with Israel or other things because the U.S. is being this guarantor of safety. But as we've seen, this is now proving the other way, that they're coming under attack precisely because they're under this U.S. security umbrella, which is much more porous than they were led to believe. We're seeing that a system built on sending $4 million interceptors after $30,000 drones is not a guarantee for long-term security. And in fact, it's a recipe for chaos and for further exposure. And we're seeing not just attacks on the US troop installations there, but attacks on the whole basis of the economies of these states, whether that's the oil and gas assets, whether that's their desalination or other infrastructure, or simply this image, particularly in Dubai and the Emirates of, this is an area of stability. This is an area where you can relocate, major Fortune 500 companies and, high-level executives can live there with their families. This is all gone, almost overnight. So how are these states gonna move beyond this war? Absolutely, they will be considering rethinking the U.S. security umbrella. We'll see them getting closer to China, getting closer to Russia. And we don't know how this will exactly shape out at the end of the day, but the U.S. will surely be in a worse off position than it was beforehand.
Worse position than it was beforehand for the U.S. Hussam, speaking about their ally, Europe, including Spain and Italy, they seem cautious and very divided on the war. So can we say that the West is still united on the conflict or not?
So, Mariam, here, we should distinguish between acknowledging the concerns and taking responsibility. So when Europeans are acknowledging that there is a concern, they share certain concerns with the United States. The West in general, they share the same concerns. But taking responsibility, here comes the problem, because the United States is the one who took the decision of starting basically it's not the United States, it's Israel who took the decision of starting the war. The United States, according to the statements of the Secretary of War, he said we were obliged to follow. So it's basically Israel who started this, and Europeans were not consulted, as we said before, and we don't really see a coalition here or a Western front, because as I told you, they're showing that they're sharing the same concerns. But I don't think that they're going to be, they're not willing to take responsibilities, because when you said Italy and you said Spain, right?
Yes.
So basically, it's not easy. The decision of war is not an easy decision. You cannot just out of nowhere, a country decided to go war and put pressure on you to participate. Things don't work like this in international relations, because these countries, they have their own interests, they have their own domestic concerns. Talking about Italy and Spain, they have a lot of internal problems. We're talking about immigration, talking about energy, and there are multiple problems that they're having that they cannot just out of nowhere decide to participate in this war. So because war is very costly and it's not a decision that can be taken slightly, Miriam. So I don't really see the Europe having a coalition to support the idea
US
of war
on Iran.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe as a last question, because we only have a minute or two to wrap up this show. Mr. Sesi, China is raising its tone diplomatically. So could Beijing emerge as a key power broker in this crisis? In just a minute, please.
Yes, absolutely. To make it short, yes, China could play a very honest broker. Number one, they have the global influence. China has a strong economic and diplomatic ties across Asia, Africa, Middle East, and even part of Europe. Also, China is a neutral positioning in some conflict. Certain dispute, China is not directly involved militarily, which can make it appear as a more acceptable mediator. And then China have a track record. For example, China helped, as I said before, facilitate the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2023. And of course, last but not least, the economical leverage through initiative like the Belt and Road Initiative. China have influence. It can use and encourage negotiation, but a true negotiation. Thank you.
Through negotiation. Thank you very much for your insights, so Mr. Chris Sesi. You joined us live from New York. Mr.
I'm sorry?
Thank you very much. Also to Mr. Sasha Shabra, you joined us also from the UK live via Teams.
Thank you.
Thank you also, Mr. Abdel Noor Toumi, for being here with us in our studio.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hussein Barkan, also for your participation in our program.
Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, viewers, for your kind attention, and see you in our next editions.